The stars dimmed as the Oblivion's vanguard breached Earth's orbit, its immense shadow casting a suffocating pall over the planet below. Its hull shimmered with alien glyphs that pulsed like dying embers, each flicker a silent taunt to Earth's fragile defenses. From the observation deck of the UES Perseverance, Commander Elias Trent stared at the massive warship, his expression carved from stone. He said nothing for a long moment, letting the oppressive silence speak louder than words. "Bring up the Dominion's transmission," Trent ordered, his voice low but commanding. The officers on the bridge exchanged uneasy glances, their faces pale under the sterile glow of the consoles. One of them, Lieutenant Grayson, hesitated before pressing the control panel. A hologram materialized, bathing the room in an eerie red hue. Overlord Cale Darien stood tall, draped in flowing armor that glimmered like molten steel. His piercing yellow eyes seemed to pierce through the hologram itself, making even the seasoned officers shift uncomfortably. "People of Earth," Darien began, his voice a chilling blend of mechanized precision and unyielding arrogance, "your species has lingered in the shadows of irrelevance for far too long. Today you face a choice: submit to the celestial dominion and join the stars under our rule, or burn with your defiance." Darien's words hung in the air like a blade, the silence that followed heavier than the ship's artificial gravity. Trent's jaw tightened, his gray eyes narrowing as he leaned forward. "You call that an offer?" Trent muttered under his breath, his voice dripping with disdain. Darien seemed to sense the resistance. The hologram leaned in, his tone softening into something more sinister. "This is not a negotiation, Commander Trent. It is an inevitability. Submit, and your people will be spared the suffering that follows rebellion. Resist, and your legacy will be one of ashes and ruin." The transmission cut out abruptly, leaving the bridge bathed in its usual cold light. A tense silence followed, broken only by the distant hum of the ship's engines. "What's the play, Commander?" Grayson asked, his voice steady but laced with an undertone of fear. Trent turned to face his crew, his voice rising with measured intensity. "We've been underestimated before. They see Earth as a dying ember, ready to be snuffed out. But we're more than that. We're the wildfire they'll wish they'd never ignited." The officers straightened in their seats, their collective fear tempered by Trent's calm defiance. He turned to the ship's tactical officer, Lieutenant Rourke. "Status on the Codex Avum?" Rourke hesitated before answering, his brow furrowed. "Still decoding, sir. But the artifact's readings are volatile. It's as if it's trying to guide us, but not without risk." "Volatile is fine," Trent said, his lips curving into a grim smile. "It's riskier to do nothing." As Rourke relayed commands, Trent allowed his thoughts to drift for a moment. His gaze fell on the observation window, where the Oblivion's vanguard loomed like a monument to despair. He closed his eyes, and for a fleeting moment, the sterile hum of the bridge faded into the echoes of another war, another time. The flashback struck like a lightning bolt. A younger Marcus Trent, clad in worn battle armor, stood amidst the smoldering wreckage of a battlefield. Fires crackled in the distance, their heat clawing at his skin as smoke choked the air. Around him lay the ruins of humanity's first great interstellar fleet, a stark reminder of their vulnerability. "They're adapting faster than we expected," Marcus growled, gripping the edge of a shattered console. "We've been fighting machines for decades, but this feels like they're thinking ahead of us." An aide approached, his face streaked with grime and desperation. "Sir, the Rogue A's are offering a truce. They claim they have intel on the enemy's next move." Marcus's jaw tightened as he turned to face the aide. "A truce? From the same machines that slaughtered billions? They're asking us to trust them now?" "Yes, sir. They claim it's the only way humanity survives." The memory shattered like glass as Trent opened his eyes, the weight of his ancestors' decision pressing against his chest. The choices Marcus had made, the lines he'd crossed, they felt eerily familiar now. "Sir," Grayson interrupted, bringing Trent back to the present, "Dominion ships are targeting outer colonies. Civilian casualties are climbing." Trent's face hardened, and his tone sharpened like a blade. Get the fleet mobilized. I want interceptors running interference, and the defense grid primed. And the codex? Grayson asked. Trent's gaze lingered on the glowing artifact encased in its reinforced housing. It was a relic of humanity's past, its origins shrouded in both legend and blood. Despite its cryptic warnings, Trent felt its pull, an almost sentient urging to act. The Codex is our wild card, Trent said. We don't play it until we're out of options. The Perseverance surged into motion, flanked by a scattering of Earth's surviving fleet. From the command deck, Trent watched as the holographic display filled with red indicators marking Dominion ships closing in on a defenseless colony. "Patch me through to Commander Alaric on the Resolute," Trent ordered. Moments later, Alaric's stern face appeared on the comm screen. "Trent," Alaric greeted tersely, "I hope you have a plan." "I have a suggestion," Trent replied. "If the Dominion wants to tighten the noose, let's make them regret it. We draw them toward the asteroid belt and use it to our advantage." Alaric frowned, his skepticism evident. "You want us to fight them in that death trap?" "Our ships aren't designed for that kind of terrain." "Neither are theirs," Trent countered. "And we have something they don't: unpredictability." Alaric sighed, the weight of command etched into every line of his face. "You've got guts, Trent. I'll give you that. Fine. We'll set the trap, but you'd better have an escape plan." As the comms cut off, Trent turned to Grayson. "Send the coordinates to the fleet, and make sure the Dominion knows we're running scared. Let's give them a reason to chase us." The stars outside the observation deck flickered as Earth's fleet began its calculated retreat. Trent's hands rested on the console, his fingers curling into fists. He could feel the weight of every life under his command, the crushing pressure of every decision he made. The Codex even pulsed faintly as if aware of the stakes. Trent stared at it, his mind racing. It had led humanity through the darkest chapters of its history: wars against machines, famine, extinction-level threats. But its guidance had always come at a cost. "Sir," Grayson called, breaking the tension. "Incoming transmission. It's Darien." Trent straightened, his expression unreadable as the hologram reappeared. Darien's golden eyes burned with contempt as he spoke. "Running, Commander? How very human of you." Trent smirked, the faintest hint of defiance in his voice. "Oh, we're running all right. But don't mistake retreat for surrender. You wanted a fight, Darien? You've got one." The Dominion's overlord leaned forward, his expression darkening. "You won't survive this, Trent. None of you will." The transmission cut, and Trent turned back to his crew. "He thinks he's already won," he said. "Let's make sure he's wrong." The hum of the ship intensified as the fleet plunged toward the asteroid belt, their trap set, their resolve unshaken. The game had begun, and humanity was ready to dance. The asteroid belt loomed ahead, a shifting labyrinth of stone and metal shards tumbling through the void. Each fragment gleamed faintly in the light of distant stars, a silent testament to celestial chaos. On the UES Perseverance, the tension was a living thing, crawling across the bridge like static electricity. The crew moved with hurried precision, their faces taut with focus, the weight of Trent's gamble pressing down on them. Elias Trent stood at the command console, his fingers tracing the edge of the holographic map, as if to absorb the enormity of the battle to come. The Dominion's fleet followed their retreat like wolves stalking wounded prey, their formation tight and confident. He could almost feel Darien's arrogance radiating through the holographic display. "Distance to the asteroid field?" Trent asked, his voice steady but sharp. 3 minutes, sir," Lieutenant Grayson replied, his tone clipped. The young officer's hands danced over the console, inputting calculations to guide their navigation. "Fleet's maintaining formation, but we're picking up energy spikes from the Dominion vanguard. Looks like they're charging weapons." "Let them," Trent said, his voice low, almost a growl. "They think they've got us cornered. Let's make them believe it." The hum of the engines deepened, the ship vibrating faintly under his boots. Trent's eyes flicked to the display again, studying the Dominion fleet's movements. They were closing in, confident in their superior firepower. A faint smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. Confidence was a weapon, but it could also be a weakness. A faint beeping sound drew his attention to the communications console. Incoming transmission, the comms officer said, his voice tight. It's from the Dominion. Patch it through, Trent ordered. Kale Darian's image materialized, his sharp features illuminated by the cold glow of his command deck. The Overlord's expression was one of smug amusement. Still running, Commander? I expected more from the leader of Earth's finest. Running, yes, Trent replied, his tone dry. But only because it's amusing to watch you chase your tail. Darian's eyes narrowed, the flicker of irritation momentary but telling. Your defiance will cost you dearly, Trent. The Dominion does not tolerate insolence. Trent leaned closer to the hologram, his gray eyes unflinching. Then you're in for a long, expensive war. The transmission cut abruptly, Darian's disdain replaced by the cold efficiency of his fleet. Trent straightened, turning back to his crew. That bought us time. Grayson, signal the fleet to execute Maneuver Sigma 4 as we enter the field. Keep it tight, but don't make it look too rehearsed. Aye, sir, Grayson replied, his voice steadier now. He relayed the orders, his fingers moving with renewed confidence over the console. The asteroid field swallowed them like the jaws of some great beast, the jagged rocks casting long shadows across the fleet. The Perseverance maneuvered nimbly, its engines firing in short bursts to navigate the debris. Outside the viewport, Trent could see the Dominion ships entering the field, their movements precise but cautious. They didn't belong here. This was humanity's chosen battlefield. On the tactical display, red markers representing Dominion ships flickered closer. Trent's jaw tightened as he studied their formation. They were spreading out, trying to encircle his fleet. He tapped a command into the console, bringing up the positions of the stealth mines his team had deployed hours earlier. Invisible to Dominion sensors, the mines lay dormant, waiting for the right moment. "Rourke," Trent called. "Status on the mines?" "Primed and ready, sir," Rourke replied, his voice steady despite the tension. "We just need them to take the bait." Trent nodded, his gaze fixed on the display. They will. The seconds stretched into eternity as the Dominion ships edged closer, their movements calculated and predatory. Trent's hands clenched behind his back, the weight of every life under his command pressing against him. He could feel the unspoken fear in the room, the way the crew's movements seemed sharper, more deliberate, as if they could cut through their own anxiety. And then it happened. The lead Dominion ship, a sleek vessel bristling with weapons, crossed into the minefield. Trent's hand shot out, activating the mines with a single command. The silence of the bridge shattered as explosions ripped through the void. The Dominion ship disintegrated in a brilliant burst of light, its debris scattering like fireflies in the darkness. "Direct hit!" Rourke called, a flicker of triumph in his voice. The holographic display lit up with more explosions as the mines detonated in quick succession, catching several more Dominion ships in their deadly embrace. The asteroid field became a symphony of destruction, the sharp, crackling sounds of energy discharges echoing faintly through the hull. But the Dominion was not so easily cowed. Their remaining ships adjusted their formation, their movements growing more cautious. Trent watched as a larger vessel, its hull adorned with glowing glyphs, moved to the forefront. It fired a concentrated energy beam, obliterating an asteroid in its path with terrifying precision. "They're adapting," Grayson said, his voice tinged with unease. "Good," Trent replied, his tone colder than the void outside. "That's when they make mistakes." The Perseverance banked hard to avoid a fragment of debris, its engines flaring brightly against the darkness. Trent's orders came rapid fire now, each one calculated to keep the Dominion guessing. His fleet wove through the asteroid field like a pack of wolves, striking and retreating, forcing the Dominion to chase phantoms. Amid the chaos, a message pinged through the tactical system. Trent glanced at it, his brow furrowing. It was a coded transmission, originating from one of the Dominion ships. He tapped the console, decrypting the message. "Commander Trent," the message began, the voice distorted but undeniably human. "This is Captain Jorath of the Dominion ship Vigilant. I am defecting. I have information vital to your survival." Trent's mind raced as he processed the message. A defector could be a valuable asset, or a deadly trap. He tapped into the comm system, his voice calm but firm. Jorath, if this is a ploy, you'll regret it. What's your proof? Darian's plans go beyond Earth, Jorath replied. He's using your fight to test a weapon that will enslave the galaxy. I can get you the intel, but you have to act fast. My ship is already compromised. Trent exchanged a glance with Grayson, whose expression mirrored his own suspicion. Bring the Vigilant into the perimeter, Trent ordered, but keep them under close watch. As the Vigilant limped into view, its hull scarred from recent battles, Trent felt the stirrings of something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in days. Hope. It was faint and fragile, but it was there. The game was shifting, and he intended to stay 3 moves ahead. Prepare for the next phase, Trent said, his voice unwavering. We're just getting started. The asteroid field swirled around the fleet like a fragmented halo, each jagged rock a potential ally or enemy, depending on how it was wielded. The Perseverance drifted into a narrow corridor, the engines muted to a low rumble to avoid drawing unnecessary attention. The stillness inside the bridge was deceptive, a fragile pause that hid the storm brewing in every mind. Commander Elias Trent stood near the main console, his posture rigid, his expression unreadable. The holographic map before him flickered with tactical readouts, the Dominion fleet marked in an ominous red. Among them, the Vigilant floated uneasily, its dark hull scarred from the battle that had preceded its defection. Trent studied the vessel's schematics as if willing it to reveal its secrets. "Any movement on the Vigilant?" he asked, his voice a measured blend of calm and authority. Lieutenant Rourke's fingers danced over his console, pulling up surveillance feeds from the perimeter. "No suspicious activity yet, sir. Their weapon systems are still offline. They're broadcasting minimal power signatures just as requested." Trent grunted in acknowledgement, though his gaze lingered on the blinking marker that represented Captain Jorath's ship. A defector from the Dominion was an anomaly, a wild card in a game already teetering on the edge of chaos. His instincts whispered warnings, but the promise of intelligence on the Dominion's secret weapon was too vital to dismiss. "Bring Jorath in," Trent said finally, his words sharp and precise. "Bridge comms only. I want eyes on every corner of that ship." A moment later, the static-filled projection of Captain Jorath materialized in the center of the bridge. He was humanoid, though the alien contours of his face, sharp cheekbones, elongated ears, and a faintly luminous scar tracing his temple, marked him as something distinctly not of Earth. His dark eyes scanned the room, lingering for a beat too long on Trent. "Commander Trent," Jorath began, his voice roughened by fatigue but steady. "I come bearing more than just intelligence. I bring an opportunity." Trent's gray eyes locked onto the alien captain's, his tone razor-sharp. "You'll forgive me if I don't trust gifts wrapped in Dominion armor?" Jorath's lips twisted into a wry smile, though there was no humor in it. "Understandable. But hear me out. Darian isn't just testing your defenses. He's testing loyalty within his own ranks. The weapon he's developing isn't just meant to subjugate Earth. It's a tool for controlling the Dominion itself." The words settled over the room like a cold fog. Officers exchanged uneasy glances, their movements stiff with restrained tension. "What kind of weapon?" Trent asked, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. Jorath hesitated, his gaze flickering to the holographic display of the Dominion fleet. "A biomechanical system embedded into their flagship. It's designed to assimilate opposition, soldiers, ships, entire fleets, into a singular, obedient force. Once activated, resistance becomes irrelevant." Rourke let out a low whistle, the sound breaking the heavy air. "And how do we stop something like that?" Jorath's gaze snapped back to Trent. "The core of the system lies within the Oblivion's vanguard. Its defenses are formidable, but not impenetrable. A precise infiltration could disable the weapon before it's fully operational." Trent folded his arms across his chest, his mind racing. An infiltration meant risking lives, but the alternative was a weapon capable of erasing autonomy across the galaxy. It wasn't a choice. It was an inevitability. "How do I know you're not leading us into a trap?" Trent pressed, his tone colder now. "You don't," Jorath admitted, the candor in his voice disarming. "But if I wanted you dead, I wouldn't be standing here now. Darien doesn't need my help to annihilate you. He's giving you time because he wants to see how far you'll run before the end." The statement hung in the air like a pendulum, its weight undeniable. Trent exhaled slowly, his resolve hardening like tempered steel. "We'll consider your intel," he said, his voice firm. "But understand this, Joreth. One misstep, one sign of betrayal, and I'll make sure your name becomes a cautionary tale." Joreth inclined his head, the faintest trace of respect glinting in his dark eyes. "I wouldn't expect anything less, Commander." As the projection faded, Trent turned to his crew. "Rourke, corroborate his intel with what we've already gathered. I want a comprehensive risk assessment within the hour. Grayson, ensure our infiltration teams are prepped and on standby." "Aye, sir," they replied in unison, their voices carrying a renewed sense of urgency. Trent's gaze drifted back to the map, his thoughts spiraling. The Codex Avum rested on a nearby console, its faint glow pulsing rhythmically, almost impatiently. Its cryptic guidance had proven invaluable before, but each answer it provided seemed to come with a darker question. He reached for the artifact, his fingers brushing its smooth surface. The pulse quickened, and with it came another flashback, an intrusive memory that burned through his consciousness like wildfire. Marcus Trent stood on a desolate battlefield, the air thick with smoke and the acrid scent of burned metal. The wreckage of human and AI forces littered the ground, their once mighty frames reduced to twisted scraps. Marcus's breath came in ragged gasps, his armor scorched and battered. "Commander," a voice crackled through his comms, strained with desperation. "We're down to our last line of defense. Reinforcements are still hours out." Marcus's jaw clenched as he surveyed the carnage, the weight of his decisions pressing against his chest. "Then we hold," he said, his voice raw but resolute. "We hold this line, or there won't be a tomorrow to fight for." The memory faded, leaving Elias with the ghost of his ancestors' determination. He straightened, his voice cutting through the bridge's tense silence. "We're not waiting for them to strike first. We're taking the fight to them." The crew sprang into action, their movements swift and deliberate. Orders flew across the comms as the fleet prepared for the next phase. The asteroid field, once a refuge, was now a staging ground for humanity's defiance. Trent's eyes lingered on the holographic map, his gaze narrowing on the Oblivion's vanguard. It loomed like a dark monolith, its presence a constant reminder of the stakes. He could feel the tendrils of mystery coiling around the situation, each revelation raising more questions than it answered. Joreth's intel was a gamble, the Codex a double-edged sword, and Darien's ultimate plan an enigma. But Trent knew one thing with absolute certainty. The Dominion had made a grave mistake in underestimating humanity's will to survive. The board was set, the pieces in motion. The only question now was who would make the next move, and at what cost. The asteroid field lay ahead like a cosmic graveyard, its jagged stones spinning in a chaotic ballet. Shadows stretched long across the debris, cast by the faint light of distant stars. The void was eerily quiet, punctuated only by the low hum of the Perseverance's engines. Commander Elias Trent stood at the command console, his sharp gaze fixed on the holographic display. Every movement of the Dominion fleet, every shift in their formation, played out in glowing red markers. "Joreth's intel checks out," Rourke said, breaking the tense silence. "The Vanguard's core is definitely powering something big. If we're going to strike, now's the time." Trent didn't respond immediately. His mind churned with calculations, possibilities branching out in all directions like veins of light. The Dominion was closing in, their ships weaving through the asteroid field with deadly precision. The display flickered as Grayson updated their positions, and Trent could almost feel the enemy's relentless advance. "Signal the fleet," Trent said finally, his voice calm but resolute. "We'll draw them deeper into the field, keep them guessing, and make sure the Codex stays protected. It's the one thing we can't afford to lose." Grayson nodded, his fingers moving with purpose over the console. "Aye, sir. Relaying orders now." The ship's engines rumbled, the vibrations faintly felt through the floor beneath Trent's boots. Outside the viewport, asteroids loomed like silent sentinels, their surfaces scarred by time and countless collisions. The Perseverance slipped between them with practiced grace, its maneuvering thrusters firing in short bursts. "Enemy ships are adjusting their formation," Rourke said, his tone edged with tension. "They're splitting into two groups, likely trying to box us in." "Let them try," Trent replied. His voice carried a quiet confidence, the kind that steadied nerves rather than stoked false hope. "They'll only tighten the noose around themselves." The first wave of Dominion ships came into view, their sleek forms cutting through the asteroid field like predators stalking prey. Their engines glowed faintly, the light reflecting off their polished hulls. From the bridge of the Perseverance, the scene felt almost surreal, like watching shadows come to life. "Incoming fire!" Grayson called out, his voice sharp. Trent barely flinched as the Dominion ships unleashed a barrage of plasma bolts. The projectiles streaked through the void, their brilliance illuminating the asteroids in brief, fiery bursts. The Perseverance banked hard, its shields absorbing the brunt of the attack. Sparks erupted from a nearby console, and the acrid scent of burnt circuits filled the air. "Shields holding at 70%, Rourke reported, his tone clipped. "Return fire," Trent ordered. "Target their flanks. Make them think we're retreating." The ship's cannons roared to life, sending streaks of energy lancing through the field. Explosions erupted in the distance as one of the Dominion ships took a direct hit, its hull splintering into molten shards. The remaining ships pressed forward, undeterred. Trent's gaze darted to the tactical display, his mind racing. The enemy was playing into his hands, but the window to execute his plan was narrowing. His fleet was outnumbered and outgunned. The only advantage they had was the terrain. "Detonate the first mine cluster," Trent commanded. Rourke keyed in the command, and a heartbeat later the asteroid field lit up with a series of controlled detonations. Shrapnel and energy bursts tore through the Dominion formation, sending ships veering wildly to avoid the cascading debris. One of their vessels collided with an asteroid, its hull crumpling like paper under the impact. "Direct hit," Rourke said, a hint of satisfaction in his voice. Trent allowed himself a brief moment of relief, but it was fleeting. The Dominion ships regrouped quickly, their movements precise and coordinated. Their discipline was formidable, their resolve unyielding. "Sir, the Vanguard is on the move," Grayson said, his voice heavy with urgency. "It's closing in on our position." Trent's jaw tightened as he studied the map. The Oblivion's Vanguard was a behemoth, its sheer size dwarfing every other ship in the Dominion fleet. It moved with the deliberate menace of a predator, confident in its dominance. The air on the bridge seemed to grow heavier as the reality of the flagship's approach settled over the crew. "We're not ready to face that thing head-on," Trent said, his tone low but firm. "Keep drawing them deeper. We need more time." Another barrage rocked the Perseverance, the impact rattling the ship's frame. The bridge lights flickered, and Trent could hear the faint hiss of damaged systems struggling to compensate. "Shields down to 40%, Rourke called out. "Grayson, have the fleet tighten their formation," Trent said. "Focus fire on the smaller ships. We need to thin their numbers." The crew moved with synchronized urgency, their actions a testament to the rigorous training Trent had drilled into them. Outside, the battle raged on, the asteroid field becoming a chaotic tapestry of explosions and debris. Amid the chaos, a transmission crackled through the comms. Jorath's voice cut through the static, his tone steady despite the tension. "Trent, the Vanguard's movements are too deliberate. They're not just following you, they're hurting you." Trent's eyes narrowed as he processed the words. "Hurting us where?" "I don't know yet," Jorath admitted, his frustration evident. "But Darien doesn't make moves without purpose. He's setting a trap." The word sent a chill down Trent's spine, but he didn't let it show. He turned to Grayson, his tone sharper now. "Keep an eye on their lead ships. If they're guiding us, I want to know where." The Dominion ships pressed their assault, their relentless aggression driving Trent's fleet deeper into the asteroid field. The Perseverance weaved through the debris, its engines straining under the pressure of constant maneuvers. The air on the bridge grew thick with the acrid tang of overheating systems, the faint whir of coolant fans struggling to keep pace. "Enemy reinforcements inbound," Rourke reported grimly. "We're running out of space to maneuver." Trent's mind raced, the weight of the situation bearing down on him. The Dominion's tactics were evolving, their strategy shifting like a puzzle with missing pieces. The trap Jorath had warned about was tightening, and Trent knew they were running out of time to act. "Prepare the fleet for the next phase," Trent said, his voice steady despite the tension. "We've given them the chase they wanted. Now let's make them regret it." The crew snapped to action, their movements fueled by a shared determination. The Perseverance banked sharply, its engines flaring brightly as it led the fleet deeper into the asteroid field. Outside, the Dominion ships followed, their pursuit relentless. As Trent watched the tactical display, a flicker of unease settled over him. The Vanguard's movements were too precise, its position too deliberate. The mystery of Darien's plan loomed larger with every passing second, a shadow that refused to be ignored. For now the battle raged on, but Trent couldn't shake the feeling that the true test was yet to come. And when it did, the fate of more than just Earth would hang in the balance. The atmosphere on the bridge of the Perseverance was suffocating, charged with an electric tension that seemed to spark off every console. The hum of strained engines reverberated beneath the deck, an unrelenting reminder of the battle still unfolding outside. The tactical display cast an eerie glow across the crew, their faces slick with sweat and taut with concentration. Every breath felt heavy, every second weighed down by the Dominion's relentless pursuit. Commander Elias Trent stood at the helm, his sharp gaze fixed on the holographic map. The Dominion fleet was tightening its net, herding his ships into an ever-narrowing corridor. His fingers tapped against the console, a rhythmic tick-tock that mirrored the countdown in his mind. The Vanguard was no longer a distant menace. It loomed closer with every passing moment, its vast silhouette like a shadow devouring the stars. "Status on the fleet?" Trent asked, his voice a blade slicing through the oppressive silence. Grayson glanced up from his console, his face pale but steady. "We've lost the Valor and the Regent. The rest of the fleet is holding formation, but our flanking ships are taking heavy fire. Shields on most vessels are below 40%. Trent's jaw tightened, his frustration a slow burn beneath his composed exterior. "And the mines?" "Nearly depleted," Rourke replied, his tone clipped. "We've got one cluster left, but they'll know to avoid it if we don't use it wisely." Trent nodded, his mind working like a clockwork machine, each cog grinding against the weight of impossible odds. He glanced toward the viewport, where the asteroid field was thinning, giving way to open space. The Vanguard loomed larger now, its glowing hull a web of intricate glyphs that seemed to pulse in rhythm with its deadly intent. "Jorath," Trent called, activating the comms link. "You said Darien's hurting us. Where does he want us?" The Dominion defector's voice crackled through the speakers, tense but resolute. "There's an energy anomaly ahead, barely detectable through the debris. It's some kind of localized distortion field, likely masking the core of his weapon. He's drawing you into its range." Trent's eyes narrowed, his thoughts aligning with a grim inevitability. "If we cross into that field, we're done." "That's the point," Jorath replied. "But it's also where he's most vulnerable. The distortion weakens shielding, his ships included. If you can get a strike team aboard, you might have a chance to disable the core." "Might isn't good enough," Rourke muttered under his breath. "It'll have to be," Trent said, his voice steely. He turned to his crew, his tone rising with authority. "Relay the orders. The fleet holds the line here. Draw as much fire as you can without getting into the distortion field. I'll take a strike team to the Vanguard." Grayson spun toward him, his expression a mixture of shock and defiance. "Sir, you can't—" "I can," Trent interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. "This isn't a democracy, Lieutenant. The Vanguard is the key to this fight, and it's a key we're going to break." The bridge fell into a tense silence, the weight of his words pressing down on every soul present. Grayson swallowed hard, then nodded, his voice subdued. "Understood, sir. I'll coordinate the fleet." As Trent left the bridge, the hum of activity resumed, sharper now, more focused. He made his way to the armory, the metallic scent of polished weapons filling the air. The strike team assembled there snapped to attention as he entered, their expressions a blend of fear and determination. "Listen up," Trent began, his voice carrying the weight of command. "We're boarding the Vanguard. Our objective is to reach the core and disable it. This isn't a suicide mission, but it's close. If anyone's not ready to make that call, now's your chance to step back." Not a single man moved. Their silence was louder than any cheer, a testament to their resolve. "Good," Trent said, his lips curving into a grim smile. "Then let's get to it." The boarding craft was a small, angular vessel designed for speed and stealth. Its interior vibrated faintly as the engines powered up, the hum a steady reminder of the danger ahead. Trent strapped into his seat, the harness digging into his shoulders. He could feel the tension in the air, thick and almost tangible, as the strike team readied themselves for what lay ahead. The craft launched from the Perseverance, its engines flaring as it darted toward the looming shape of the Vanguard. The silence inside the vessel was oppressive, broken only by the faint beeps of the control panel and the whispered prayers of one of the soldiers. The viewport offered a harrowing view of the battlefield, a maelstrom of fire and debris where the fleet fought to buy them precious minutes. As they approached the Vanguard, its details came into sharper focus. The glyphs etched into its hull seemed alive, pulsating with an energy that made Trent's skin crawl. The distortion field warped the space around it, bending light and creating ghostly echoes of the ship that flickered and faded. "We're entering the field," the pilot announced, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. The craft shuddered as it crossed the threshold, the distortion rippling through the hull like a tangible wave. Trent gritted his teeth, his grip tightening on the edge of his seat. The Vanguard loomed closer, its docking port a dark maw that seemed to swallow them whole. The craft latched onto the port with a metallic clang, the seals hissing as the airlock engaged. Trent unbuckled his harness, his movements swift and deliberate. He could feel the weight of his sidearm against his hip, the cool metal a small comfort against the rising tide of uncertainty. "Move out," he ordered, his voice steady. The airlock opened with a hiss, revealing the dimly lit corridor beyond. The walls were lined with faintly glowing glyphs that seemed to watch them, their light casting eerie shadows that danced with every step. The air was cold and stale, carrying a faint metallic tang that clung to the back of Trent's throat. The strike team advanced cautiously, their weapons raised. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the soft hum of the Vanguard systems. Every corner felt like a trap, every shadow a potential threat. The further they moved, the more the ship seemed to close in around them, its vast corridors twisting and narrowing. "Commander," one of the soldiers whispered, his voice tight with unease, "this place feels alive." Trent didn't respond, but he felt it too. A presence, intangible yet undeniable. The glyphs on the walls seemed to pulse in time with his heartbeat, their light dimming and brightening in a rhythm that felt deliberate. As they approached the central chamber, a low, resonant hum filled the air. The walls seemed to vibrate with it, the sound a deep, bone-shaking note that made Trent's stomach churn. He raised a hand, signaling the team to halt. Ahead, the corridor opened into a vast chamber, its ceiling disappearing into shadows. At its center stood the core, a pulsating mass of energy encased in a lattice of shifting metal. Tendrils of light arced from it, dancing across the walls like living things. The sight was both beautiful and terrifying, a testament to the Dominion's mastery of both technology and horror. "We've found it," Trent said, his voice barely audible. But as they stepped into the chamber, the glyphs along the walls flared brighter, their light sharpening into a brilliant, blinding pulse. From the shadows emerged figures, biomechanical sentinels, their forms a grotesque fusion of metal and flesh. Their movements were unnervingly fluid, their glowing eyes fixed on the intruders. Trent's grip tightened on his weapon, his heart pounding as the sentinels closed in. The air grew thick with tension, the faint hum of the core rising to a deafening crescendo. And then, with a single command, the room erupted into chaos. The chamber erupted in a cacophony of sound and light. The sentinels surged forward, their movements unnervingly fluid, their metallic forms gleaming under the flickering glyphs. Each step they took reverberated through the floor, a sharp clang echoing like a war drum. The air was thick with the acrid tang of overheated machinery, and the faint hum of the core had grown into a pulsating roar that seemed to pierce Trent's skull. "Form a perimeter!" Trent barked, his voice cutting through the chaos. He raised his weapon, the recoil slamming into his shoulder as he unleashed a volley of plasma rounds. The shots connected with the nearest sentinel, searing through its armor and sending a cascade of sparks across the chamber. The team moved as one, their boots pounding against the metal floor as they spread out. The sharp staccato of gunfire echoed through the chamber, interspersed with the high-pitched whine of energy bursts. The sentinels retaliated with deadly precision, their weapons embedded into their limbs, firing bolts of searing light that scorched the air and left trails of smoke in their wake. "Left flank's exposed," one of the soldiers shouted, his voice strained as he dove behind a support column for cover. Trent spun toward the threat, his eyes narrowing as two sentinels broke through the line. He sprinted forward, his boots pounding against the floor as he closed the gap. The faint metallic scent of their exoskeletons hit him as he slid low, firing upward. The first sentinel collapsed in a heap, its internal mechanisms sparking violently. The second pivoted, its glowing eyes fixed on Trent with an eerie intelligence. Before it could strike, another soldier, Eckhart, lunged into the fray, slamming a charged blade into the sentinel's chest. The impact sent a shockwave through the air, the blade's energy dissipating with a sharp crack. The sentinel spasmed, its limbs jerking before it crumpled to the ground. "Appreciate the save," Trent muttered, his breath coming in short gasps. Eckhart gave a tight nod, his jaw set as he scanned the chamber for the next wave. "No time for thanks, Commander. They're regrouping." The core loomed in the center of the chamber, a pulsating mass of light and metal that seemed almost alive. Tendrils of energy arced from its surface, snaking across the walls and ceiling like living lightning. The glyphs glowed brighter now, their intensity almost blinding, and the air vibrated with an otherworldly hum that resonated deep in Trent's chest. "We need to reach the core," Trent called out, his voice cutting through the din. "It's the only way to shut this thing down." Rourke's voice crackled through the comms, distant but steady. "Commander, readings from the Vanguard's outer hull are spiking. The distortion field's weakening. They're diverting all power to the core." Trent's stomach sank. The Vanguard was making its final move, and they were running out of time. He glanced at the core, its glow intensifying with each passing second. The sheer power radiating from it made his skin prickle, the heat seeping through his suit. "Eckhart, Sullivan, cover me," Trent ordered. He darted toward the core, his movements sharp and deliberate. The rest of the team provided covering fire, their weapons lighting up the chamber with rapid bursts of energy. The sentinels pressed forward, their numbers seemingly endless, each one more relentless than the last. Trent reached the base of the core, the metal surface warm under his gloved hands. He pulled a compact device from his belt, a disruptor designed to overload energy systems, and began attaching it to the core's outer casing. The device emitted a faint hum, its lights blinking in a steady rhythm as it calibrated. The sentinels surged again, their glowing eyes fixed on Trent. One of them leapt forward, its metallic claws outstretched, a guttural mechanical growl emanating from its chest. Trent ducked just in time, the claws slicing through the air inches from his face. He rolled to the side, the impact of his body against the floor, jarring but necessary. "Commander, heads up!" Eckhart shouted. Trent looked up just as another sentinel lunged toward him. This time it was Sullivan who intervened, firing a concentrated energy bolt that struck the sentinel mid-air. The impact sent it crashing to the ground, its limbs flailing before going still. "Devices in place," Trent called out, his voice strained. "But it needs time to charge." "We don't have time," Eckhart replied, his voice tight as he slammed another sentinel into the wall, the impact leaving a deep dent in the metal. The core pulsed violently, sending a shockwave through the chamber that knocked Trent off his feet. The disruptor's lights flickered, and for a heart-stopping moment, Trent thought it had failed. But then the device emitted a sharp beep, its calibration complete. "We're set," Trent said, scrambling to his feet. "Now we just need to get out of here." The team began to retreat, their movements synchronized despite the chaos. The sentinels pressed harder, their aggression escalating as if they sensed the impending threat to the core. One by one, the soldiers fired off their remaining rounds, their weapons glowing hot from overuse. As they reached the exit, Trent activated the disruptor remotely. The device emitted a piercing whine, its energy building to a crescendo. The core's light dimmed momentarily, then flared brighter than ever, its tendrils of energy convulsing wildly. "Brace yourselves," Trent shouted. The disruptor detonated, its energy release a deafening roar that shook the entire chamber. The core imploded, collapsing inward in a burst of blinding light. The shockwave tore through the chamber, ripping sentinels apart and sending debris flying in every direction. Trent felt the force of the blast slam into him, the impact driving the air from his lungs. His vision blurred, and for a moment the world was nothing but noise and light. When the chaos subsided, he found himself on the ground, his body aching, his ears ringing. "Commander!" Eckhart's voice cut through the haze. "We've got to move. Now!" Trent forced himself to his feet, his muscles protesting with every movement. The chamber was a wreck, the walls scorched and cracked, the sentinels reduced to smoldering heaps of metal. The core was gone, its once brilliant light extinguished. The team stumbled back toward the docking port, their movements sluggish but determined. The Vanguard shuddered around them, its systems faltering as the core's destruction rippled through the ship. Alarms blared, their shrill tones echoing through the corridors. As they boarded the craft and launched away from the Vanguard, Trent looked back at the massive ship. Its once imposing presence was now marred by explosions, its hull fractured and burning. But even as it crumbled, he couldn't shake the feeling that Darien had anticipated this, that the real fight was still to come. The Perseverance shook violently as another blast reverberated through its hull. The Vanguard, though crippled, was far from defeated. Even in its dying throes, it loomed as an unrelenting force, casting shadows of destruction across the battlefield. Commander Elias Trent stood at the command console, his features etched with exhaustion and determination. The faint metallic tang of blood lingered in the air, mingling with the acrid scent of overheated systems. Sparks rained from damaged panels, the flickering lights casting uneven shadows across the bridge. "We need a plan," Lieutenant Grayson said, his voice barely audible over the cacophony of alarms. "The Vanguard's systems are failing, but its weapon systems are still online. It's like they're holding on just long enough to take us down with them." Trent's mind raced. His team's daring infiltration had destroyed the core, but the Vanguard was a beast that refused to die quietly. Its weapon arrays fired sporadically, bursts of energy ripping through the asteroid field and scattering smaller vessels. Each shot carried the weight of desperation, a final act of defiance from a wounded predator. "Grayson," Trent began, his tone sharper now, "show me the fleet's current formation." The holographic map flickered to life, displaying a chaotic web of ships locked in combat. The Dominion's remaining forces, though disoriented, were regrouping near the Vanguard, forming a protective shield. Earth's fleet, battered and fragmented, held a loose perimeter, desperately avoiding the Vanguard's deadly strikes. "They're funneling us into a kill zone," Trent said, his voice calm but laced with urgency. "We can't let them consolidate. If we hit them now, we can shatter their cohesion before they recover." "And how do we do that with half our fleet on the brink of collapse?" Grayson asked, his skepticism evident but tempered by trust. Trent's eyes narrowed as he studied the map, his mind piecing together the fragmented data. "We divide their focus. The Vanguard is their linchpin. If we make them think we're mounting a full assault on it, they'll divert resources to protect it. Meanwhile, we hit their flanks with everything we've got." Grayson nodded slowly, the beginnings of a plan forming in his mind. "A feint. Use the Vanguard as bait." "Exactly," Trent said. "We'll deploy our remaining stealth frigates to simulate an attack on the Vanguard's engines. Their cloaking tech should keep them hidden just long enough to sow chaos. At the same time, our heavy cruisers will punch through their right flank, supported by the fighters we've got left." "And the left flank?" Rourke asked, stepping closer, his tone cautious. Trent's expression darkened. "We won't hit it. Not yet. We'll leave it open just enough to make them think we're overcommitted on the right. When they overextend, we collapse on them." Grayson frowned, his fingers tracing patterns across his console. "It's risky. If they don't take the bait, we'll be exposing our fleet to concentrated fire." "I know," Trent said, his voice steady, "but we don't have the luxury of playing it safe. If this works, we cripple their defenses and buy ourselves the opening we need. If it doesn't—" He let the sentence hang, the unspoken consequence weighing heavily in the air. The crew moved with purpose, relaying orders and adjusting formations. The tactical display shifted as the fleet began repositioning, the lines of battle redrawn with calculated precision. The bridge was a symphony of controlled chaos, the hum of machinery and the steady rhythm of commands blending into an unrelenting pulse. "Commander!" A voice crackled through the comms, breaking Trent's focus. It was Captain Alaric of the Resolute, his tone strained but firm. "We've got incoming fire on the outer perimeter. If you're planning something, now would be a good time to share." Trent stepped closer to the console, his voice unwavering. "Alaric, I need you to hold that line a little longer. We're executing a feint on the Vanguard. Your job is to make it look convincing. Draw their fire, but don't overcommit. We're setting the stage." "Understood," Alaric replied, his tone clipped. "But you owe me a drink if we get out of this." Trent allowed himself a faint smile, though it faded quickly as his gaze returned to the map. The Dominion's movements were precise, their ships adjusting to the chaos with alarming efficiency. Time was slipping away, the margin for error growing thinner with every passing moment. "Stealth frigates are in position," Grayson reported, "awaiting your command." Trent nodded. "Deploy them. Target the Vanguard's aft engines. Make it look like we're going for a kill shot." The display updated as the frigates moved into action, their cloaked signatures barely visible even on their own sensors. Moments later, the first volley of missiles streaked through the void, striking the Vanguard's engines in a brilliant explosion. The ship shuddered, its hulking frame tilting slightly as the force of the blast rippled through its systems. "Direct hit," Rourke said, his voice tinged with satisfaction. "That should get their attention." The Dominion reacted immediately, their ships peeling away from the flanks to form a defensive perimeter around the Vanguard. The holographic map shifted, red markers converging toward the damaged flagship. "They're taking the bait," Trent said, his tone calm but focused. "Now's our chance. Heavy cruisers, advance on the right flank. Fighters, support their approach. Keep it tight." The fleet moved like a well-oiled machine, the heavy cruisers surging forward with deliberate intensity. Their cannons roared to life, unleashing a barrage of firepower that tore through the Dominion's outer defenses. Fighters darted between the larger ships, their movements swift and precise as they harried the enemy with calculated strikes. "Dominion's right flank is folding," Grayson said, his voice rising with a mixture of relief and tension. "But their reinforcements are closing in fast." "Hold the line," Trent ordered. "We can't let them regroup." The battle intensified, the void alight with explosions and the piercing beams of energy weapons. The Perseverance shook under the strain, its shields absorbing hit after hit as it held its position at the heart of the fleet. The air on the bridge was thick with the metallic scent of overheated systems, the faint crackle of damaged circuits a constant reminder of their fragility. "Commander, the Vanguard's powering up its main cannon," Rourke called out, his voice laced with urgency. "They're targeting the cruisers." Trent's mind raced. The Dominion's flagship had been weakened, but it still possessed enough firepower to decimate their forces. The plan had worked so far, but the next move was critical. "Redirect fire to the Vanguard's midsection," Trent commanded. "Concentrate everything we've got. If we can destabilize its core, we can force a chain reaction." The fleet adjusted once more, their firepower converging on the Vanguard. The massive ship trembled under the assault, its hull splintering as explosions rippled across its surface. The glyphs adorning its exterior flickered erratically, their once imposing glow dimming with each strike. But even as the Vanguard faltered, Trent couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Darian's strategy had been deliberate, every move calculated. This felt too easy, too straightforward. "Commander," Grayson said, his voice cutting through the haze of battle. "Something's not right. The Vanguard's energy readings are spiking, but it's not powering weapons. It's redirecting." Trent's stomach dropped. The Vanguard wasn't fighting to win. It was fighting to delay. Darian had a contingency, something hidden beyond the battlefield. "Get me a scan of the anomaly Jorath mentioned," Trent ordered, his voice sharp. "Now." As the data streamed in, Trent's worst fears began to take shape. The Dominion wasn't retreating. It was preparing for the final act. The holographic map painted a chilling picture. The Vanguard's energy spike was no mere defense mechanism. It was a countdown. The anomaly Jorath had described was no distortion field. It was a containment shield, encasing a weapon of unimaginable power. Commander Elias Trent stood motionless for a moment, the faint hum of the bridge fading as the realization sank in. Darien wasn't stalling. He was finishing the game. "Grayson," Trent said, his voice sharp as a blade, "what are we looking at?" Grayson's hands flew over his console, sweat beading on his brow. "The readings suggest a massive energy discharge. If it goes critical—" He stopped, swallowing hard. "It'll take out everything within the anomaly's radius. That includes us." And Earth Trent's fists clenched, his gaze locking onto the glowing icon representing the Vanguard. The crippled flagship no longer looked like prey, but a coiled serpent, poised to strike a killing blow. "This isn't just a weapon," Trent muttered. "It's a message. Darien's showing the galaxy what happens to those who defy the Dominion." "Commander," Rourke cut in, his voice tight, "if that thing detonates, even a direct hit on the Vanguard might not stop it in time. We need a new plan." Trent exhaled slowly, his mind racing through possibilities. His fleet was battered, their resources stretched thin. A direct assault was suicide, but doing nothing wasn't an option. He glanced at the Codex Avum resting in its case, its faint glow pulsing like a heartbeat. "The Codex," Trent said, a sudden clarity in his voice. "It's been guiding us through every step of this fight. If it has anything left to give, now's the time." Grayson hesitated, then activated the artifact. The Codex flared to life, its intricate patterns shifting and reforming with a strange urgency. Data flooded the display, overlaying the tactical map with a new layer of information. It pinpointed a single weak point on the Vanguard, a structural flaw near its primary reactor. "There," Trent said, pointing to the glowing marker. "If we hit that spot, we can destabilize the reactor. It won't just stop the weapon, it'll collapse the entire ship." "That's a tight window," Rourke said, his tone grim. "We'd need pinpoint accuracy. One mistake, and it's over." Trent's jaw tightened. "Then we don't make mistakes." Grayson's voice wavered. "Sir, even if we succeed, the blast radius—" "I know," Trent interrupted. His voice was firm, but the weight of the decision was clear in his eyes. "The fleet holds position outside the anomaly. I'll lead the strike team. We'll take the Perseverance in." Silence fell over the bridge, the enormity of the plan sinking in. Then Grayson stepped forward, his expression resolute. "Permission to join the team, sir." "You're needed here, Lieutenant," Trent replied, his voice softer now. "If this goes sideways, Earth will need someone to lead." Grayson nodded reluctantly, his gaze steady. "Bring them hell, sir." The preparations were swift, every movement imbued with purpose. The Perseverance detached from the fleet, its engines roaring as it surged toward the Vanguard. The glow of the anomaly intensified, casting the ship in an ethereal light. Inside, Trent stood at the helm, flanked by the skeleton crew he had chosen for this final mission. The ship shook as the Vanguard's remaining defenses opened fire. Plasma bolts streaked through the void, each one a near miss that sent tremors through the hull. The air was thick with the metallic tang of stress and heat, every breath a reminder of the stakes. "Evasive maneuvers," Trent barked. "We need to get closer." The Perseverance weaved through the onslaught, its shields flickering under the strain. The Vanguard loomed larger with each passing second, its surface a labyrinth of glowing glyphs and jagged scars from the earlier assault. The weak point marked by the Codex was barely visible, a faint fracture in the ship's otherwise impenetrable armor. "Target locked," Rourke said, his voice steady despite the tension. "Awaiting your command." Trent's grip tightened on the console. "Fire!" The ship's main cannon roared, a concentrated beam of energy lancing toward the fracture. Time seemed to freeze as the shot connected, the impact sending a shockwave rippling through the Vanguard. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the reactor's glow faltered, dimming before flaring with an intensity that burned through the viewport. "Reactor destabilized," Rourke reported, his voice trembling with relief. The weapon's power levels are dropping. But the victory was short-lived. The Vanguard shuddered violently, its structure collapsing inward as the reactor's instability cascaded through the ship. Explosions erupted across its surface, tearing through its hull like wildfire. "The blast radius—" Grayson's voice crackled through the comms, panic bleeding into his tone. "You need to get out of there!" Trent stared at the collapsing giant, its destruction a symphony of chaos and light. His gaze shifted to the anomaly, its energy field flickering erratically as the Vanguard's death throes disrupted its stability. "Evasive course," Trent ordered, his voice calm despite the storm. "Get us clear." The Perseverance veered away from the Vanguard, its engines screaming as it fought against the gravitational pull of the anomaly. The ship shook violently, the hull groaning under the strain. Trent gripped the edge of the console, his knuckles white as the viewport filled with the blinding light of the Vanguard's final explosion. For a moment, everything went silent. The light consumed the ship, the battlefield, the stars themselves. Then the shockwave hit, a force so immense it felt as if the universe itself had exhaled. The Perseverance was hurled through the void, systems failing one by one as the crew braced for impact. When the chaos subsided, Trent opened his eyes. The bridge was a mess of sparks and smoke, the air heavy with the acrid scent of burned circuits. But they were alive. Against all odds, they had survived. "Status report," Trent rasped, his voice raw. Rourke coughed, his hands fumbling over his console. "Hull integrity at 15%. Engines are offline. Shields are gone. But we're in one piece." Trent exhaled, the weight of the mission finally lifting from his shoulders. He turned to the viewport, where the battlefield had gone quiet. The Vanguard was gone, its death marked only by the faint remnants of its explosion. The Dominion's remaining ships were in disarray, their formation broken. A faint cheer erupted from the comms as the fleet realized what had happened. Earth's forces rallied, pressing the advantage against the scattered Dominion ships. The tide had turned. Trent sank into his chair, his exhaustion finally catching up with him. The faint hum of the codex drew his attention, its glow steady and serene. It had guided them through every trial, its purpose fulfilled. Now it dimmed, its light fading as if satisfied. Grayson's voice crackled through the comms, filled with relief. "You did it, sir. The Dominion's retreating." Trent leaned forward, his voice steady, but carrying the weight of every sacrifice. "We didn't just fight for survival today. We fought for what it means to be human, to stand, to resist, to hope. Let the galaxy know, humanity does not bow. We dance with the storm and rise from the ashes." As the bridge fell silent, the stars outside seemed brighter, the vast emptiness no longer a void but a canvas of possibility. Humanity had earned its place among the stars, not through conquest, but through defiance. And in that defiance, they found their strength.